In the past 72 hours, the Hawks have apprehended several government officials and business people in connection with fraud and corruption. Yesterday, former ANC Member of Parliament of almost 2 decades, Vincent Smith, was granted bail in the Palm Ridge Magistrates Court in Johannesburg, where he appeared briefly on charges of fraud and corruption. Now, Smith appeared before the state capture inquiry last month, and he allegedly failed to declare gifts totaling 671,000 rands that he received from BOSASA for security installations at his home and payments made to his company, Euro Blitz. And this week, the Hawks also arrested 6 suspects involved in the Free State asbestos-project that cost South African taxpayers more than 250 million rand, while a 7th suspect handed himself over to the police yesterday. Now, these arrests have apparently just been the tip of the iceberg, with more likely to be made in the next few days. But let's discuss the impact of this with political analyst Gogo Aubrey Matshiqi, who joins us now via Zoom. Good morning, Gogo. Thanks for speaking to us this morning.
Good morning, Sakina.
So firstly, what's your immediate reaction to these arrests that we are seeing? Is this something that should give South Africans hope that the country is finally trying to deal with the scourge of corruption?
Well, I think South Africans and civil society should congratulate themselves for maintaining pressure on those who govern to do something about corruption and other matters we know in this country. And therefore, we must acknowledge that primarily it is because of pressure from the citizenry and civil society that we are beginning to see this kind of movement, without which I think there would either be no movement at all or movement would be slow. That said, I think we as citizens should be happy that we are beginning to see arrests. The question, though, is whether enough evidence, strong evidence, will be adduced, evidence that leads to convictions. Another thing we must look at is that while we celebrate the arrests, we should look at both who is being arrested and who is not being arrested. Because if this period is going to be a period of selective arrests, it will undermine whatever gains in positive perception the ANC government and the president in particular may gain from these arrests. So,
Gogo Aubrey, speaking of who is being arrested and who is not being arrested, there does seem to be a familiar pattern, a trend, if you will, emerging once again, whereby we do see officials and business people being arrested in the main, as opposed to what some would call the big fish, the politicians, who are implicated, whose names have come up, for example, at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. But we are, apart from Vincent Smith at this stage, and we understand a high-ranking politician in the Free State who will be appearing in court this morning, there doesn't seem to be much more happening on that front, at least not in the immediate sense.
Well, Sakina, if we must be kind about this, maybe we should also be patient, congratulate the authorities for these arrests in the hope that more arrests and significant arrests will follow in future. But also we must remember that unless key members of the governing party, key members of our government, against whom allegations have been made and against whom there exists prima facie evidence, unless those are arrested, you are not going to arrest the problem of endemic or even systemic corruption in this country. But we must bear in mind that even these arrests must be seen in the context of political communication. The question you must ask is, what is the government communicating? What is the president communicating? Given the fact that the president was under pressure because he had made the promise that he would deal with corruption and tackle corruption. in the context of what we call state capture in this country. Now, is he communicating that contrary to what is becoming a dominant perception that he is slow and soft on corruption? Is he communicating that he has turned a corner and his government has turned a corner, the criminal justice system has turned a corner, and what we are going to see from now onwards is decisive action? Or is he communicating that while in terms of our constitution, all are equal before the law, is he communicating that not all are equal before the law? Is he communicating that what will drive these arrests, prosecutions, and maybe convictions in future is selective perception, is selective arrests, selective prosecutions, which are based on his own reading and the reading of those who support him in the ruling party, of the balance of forces and support in the ruling party. One hopes that he and our criminal justice system will take decisions and take action that is independent of any configuration of the balance of forces and balance of support inside the ruling party.
So here's one of the other questions for me. If you look at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry and the work that it has done, and we've said many a time before that a lot of the information being presented to the Commission is not new. This is information that has been out in the public domain. So the law enforcement authorities cannot say that they are not aware of this information. And yet you had the president then, signing that special proclamation for the NPA and the Hawks to access testimonies from the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. Why did it have to take that, though, for us to seemingly now see the wheels of justice cranking up? Why haven't these entities worked more speedily? Why haven't the wheels of justice been turning already?
Well, we must be open to the possibility that the balance of support and the balance of forces and how they are configured inside the ruling party have in the past constrained the criminal justice system or have informed what the criminal justice system is able to do or is not able to do. Now, if we follow that line of inquiry, then we must come to another possible conclusion, that even as political power inside the party and the state changes hands, and new managers in the criminal justice system are appointed, there is always the possibility that what appears as change is actually a different version of the old, to the extent that those who are new in the criminal justice system may be doing what those who are old in the criminal justice system used to do, that is, to anticipate the wishes and desires of the powerful. In other words, for instance, during the so-called 9 wasted years of Zuma's rule, what I call 9 wasted years of ANC misrule, the criminal justice system to some extent did anticipate the wishes of those in power, and to some extent were compelled by those in power to act in particular ways. And similarly, you can't rule out the possibility that even today, that is what is happening. The fact that it is happening to the advantage of the country may not have to take away from the fact that even those who are new in the criminal justice system themselves are simply anticipating the wishes of those in power. But the difference is that coincides with the wishes of the citizenry. But I have always maintained, Sakina, that there was no need for a judicial commission of inquiry. What was needed was the criminal justice system to follow up on allegations of corruption or racketeering or fraud and so on. And in cases where there is prima facie evidence, the criminal justice system should have acted. For me, there was no need for a judicial commission of inquiry, in the same way that the ANC does not need an integrity commission. All it has to do is to follow its own disciplinary code and act accordingly against those who face allegations of corruption and other things we know.
Speaking of, your sentiments regarding the need for the commission is now in place, and it has, again highlighted a lot of these cases that were there previously. But the former president, Jacob Zuma, and the commission, and if you will, perhaps even the commission chair, some would say, have now reached a point where there's somewhat of a standoff, if you will, with the former president, basically indicating that, he really doesn't care to come back to the commission because he feels that the commission chairperson, the Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, is biased against him. And speaking of some family-related matters going back many years, what's your take on that particular standoff?
Well, there are two possibilities again here. The first possibility is that there is indeed an actual and a real standoff between the commission and the former president. The second possibility is that what we are witnessing is a manufactured tension and standoff between the former president and the Commission of Inquiry. In my view, what needs to happen, to the extent that in a letter, the legal team of the former president has already indicated that some of the grounds for their call for the chairperson to recuse himself relate to family matters. I in a similar position, would have advised that they emphasize more what they think is real in terms of statements that have been made already by the chairperson, which seem to impugn the integrity or dignity of the former president unfairly. And if they can point at such statements, my emphasis would be on that, not on the existence of any family related disputes or whatever. So, for me, another thing that is important is that there seems to be a misunderstanding about the accusation that has been leveled against the chairperson, that he is biased. Now, remember, in a recusal application, actual bias does not have to be proved. In other words, the former president does not have to prove actual bias on the part of the chairperson of the Commission of Inquiry. All he has to show is that there is a reasonable apprehension of bias. And if there is such a reasonable apprehension of bias, then of course the chairperson will have to recuse himself. But I suspect that because the Commission of Inquiry is an extension of political battles inside and outside the ANC, because it is an extension of the court of public opinion, the battle for mind share is one of the critical things that have infected it. And to some extent, therefore, the former president may or may not be playing politics himself. And to some extent, he may or may not be responding to attempts to use the battle for mind share and deploy it to his disadvantage.
But for lay South Africans looking on and listening to this latest salvo being fired by the former president, the question would then be, why didn't he raise this previously? Because he has appeared before the commission previously. Why has this become an issue now? Well,
I think if you go back to the last time he appeared, it was obvious, to me at least, that even at that time there were tensions between the president and the commission. It was obvious even at that time that the president seems to be of the view that he is the victim of bias on the part of either the commission in its entirety or on the part of the chairperson of the commission, Judge Zondo. So the tension as a general phenomenon is not new. But the fact that he may be raising particular issues of bias for the first time does not mean that privately in chambers such issues have never been raised. Because what tends to happen in the media and in the public domain and in the court of public opinion is that our views and opinions about particular issues are informed by the information available to us. And therefore, I think we must avoid being too passionate in our views, because our views may be based on very little information or maybe based on misinformation.
And as we run out of time, Aubrey, one of the things that many South Africans are talking about, given the latest PPE scandals that we've seen, the alleged tender fraud to have taken place within the space during a pandemic. We look at the state-owned enterprises and the very sorry state that many of them are in, and just a general failure on the part of municipalities, for example, to provide basic services to citizens. And people are asking, if we continue on this trajectory, are we headed towards a failed state as a nation? Because we don't seem to have the money. Looting seems to be carrying on unabated, even during a time of a pandemic. Where are we headed?
Well, Sakina, we need to talk about change at the basic surface level, where we look at the failures and weaknesses of the ANC government, and we limit our responses thereto to solutions that themselves will be limited to those weaknesses we have identified. Or we can do a much deeper reading of the true nature of the malaise that faces us. It seems to me that the first question we must ask is whether the African National Congress as a party and the African National Congress as a ruling party can be transformed. If it can be transformed, how then can these weaknesses and failures be remedied? If it cannot be transformed, then it must be discarded administratively through democratic and political and electoral processes. But if we do even a much deeper reading than that, the failures of the ANC and its weaknesses are the tip of the iceberg. There is a much more fundamental failure on the part of the post-apartheid state. And that failure, let me put it this way. If you look at the performance of the post-apartheid state, if you look at the performance of the ANC in government, it is very clear that black lives don't matter. The lives of those who are oppressed, who are victims of coloniality, do not matter. And therefore, when we have these debates, we do readings at surface level and we talk around the issue. The issue is this, Sakina. Is it possible, for instance, to transform this economy? Is it possible to effect land reform? Is it possible to reorientate the rule of law to make sure that all are equal before the law without addressing the problem, the elephant in the room, which is the fact that ours is a neo-apartheid state, is a neo-colonial state governed by or dominated by the logic of coloniality. And if we accept that, then we must ask another painful question. Is fundamental transformation in South Africa possible without white magnanimity? And if white magnanimity is not going to materialize, because the economy is in white hands, the land is in white hands, the rule of law is in white hands, if white magnanimity is not going to materialize, how then is fundamental change going to happen? What is the alternative, therefore, to white magnanimity? These are the questions we must ask without absolving the ANC that fought in a liberation struggle to ameliorate the conditions of those who are victims of colonialism without absolving it of its sins.
Well, Gogo Aubrey Matshiqi, thanks so much for your time this morning. Political analyst Gogo Aubrey Matshiqi talking to us about the arrest of several government officials and business people by the Hawks this week.